first, I would like to give a brief introduction to our sponsor and to our speaker. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute has asked Professor Philpott to speak on the topic of religious liberty. There's a growing tendency to put this liberty at odds with the rights of others, right? As we see in different discussions and opinions of the Supreme Court these past few years. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute is a nonprofit educational organization that seeks to promote free and serious intellectual discourse concerning the American tradition of liberty. ISI works towards this goal through student conferences, their graduate fellowship program, the Intercollegiate Review in Modern Age Academic Journals, the ISI book publication and reading list, and lecture series. And if you would like to learn more about student opportunities with ISI, you can reach me through my email, which I will later drop in the chat. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute is also pretty involved on campus. They also sponsor the Irish Rover, which is an independent publication here at Notre Dame, student publication. I know perhaps one of you, two of you in attending right now may have heard of it or have friends that have been published there. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Daniel Philpott. Professor Philpott has been a student of political studies his undergraduate days, receiving his BA from the University of Virginia and later his master's and PhD from Harvard in government studies. Professor Philpott taught at the University of California, Santa Barbara before joining the Department of Political Science here at Notre Dame in 2001, where he holds the distinguished position of professor. Outside of Notre Dame, he holds many other esteemed positions, such as vice chair of the board of directors at the Institute for Global Engagement, senior associate scholar at the Religious Freedom Institute, and editorial board member of the International Dialogue, a multidisciplinary journal of world affairs, politics and religion, politics, and ideology journals. Professor Philpott is a scholar of religion and global politics. His many works could probably fill the room I'm sitting in right now, and I could honestly go on for days listing his many distinctions. He has written on reconciliation, religious freedom, religious communities, sovereignty, self-determination, the role of the Catholic Church in global politics, and Christian political philosophy. This webinar is being recorded to be posted on the ISI website. After the lecture, after Professor Philpott finishes the lecture, you may all send in your questions through the Q&A chat on the right side of your screen. You can access the tab on there. Now, finally, without further ado, I present to you Dr. Daniel Philpott.
Thank you, Jorge. Let me just do a quick test. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I take it that's a yes. Thank you. Wonderful to be here, and it's an honor to be asked to do this and to be here with you, even virtually. May the day be hastened where we can do these things in person again, but it's wonderful to have this opportunity. You've been asked me to speak about the moral foundations of religious liberty. I'm happy to do that. It's a very appropriate topic for ISI. I'm a great admirer of ISI. I've known and worked with people and close friends who have been part of ISI and have admired your work for many years. So anyway, it's a great honor to be able to speak to you. So I think I'll present about 30 minutes of remarks, and then we can, hopefully that'll give you something to chew on, and then we can talk about religious freedom. Religious freedom is one of the most widely violated human rights in the world. Since 2009, the Pew Research Center has reported consistently that about 3/4 of the world's population lives under a regime that heavily violates religious freedom. In recent years, the Chinese government has cracked down on the practice of religion with an intensity not seen since the Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 1979. Interning 1 million or more Uyghur Muslims, destroying and disbanding Christian churches, and even removing children from worship services. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims in Burma have suffered violence and heavy discrimination at the hands of a Buddhist nationalist state and Buddhist armed militant groups. Governments in several Muslim-majority countries have restricted heavily and even outlawed sects that they considered heretical, including Ahmadis in Pakistan and Indonesia and Baha'is in Iran. The scope of religious freedom is increasingly restricted in Western Europe and North America too, though the curtailment is not nearly as harsh. The sources of the restriction are ideologically diverse, and the issue is openly contested, and the contestation is ongoing and its outcome certain. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. Muslims have come to face increasing restrictions on dress, immigration, and the construction of mosques. And Christians have faced challenges to their liberty to conduct commerce, education, and civil society services like hospitals and orphanages compatibly with traditional norms of marriage and sexuality. Against this vector of restriction stands the wide consensus of countries and institutions that espouse religious freedom as a fundamental civil and human right. Among the world's liberal democracies, religious freedom has been for decades an element of the standard package of rights and privileges that are said to characterize just institutions. No country considers religious freedom more foundational and integral to its liberal democratic vision than the United States. Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson opined in 1943 that, quote, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faiths therein," unquote. An American narrative of religious freedom accords great weight to the principles articulation in the First Amendment to the Constitution and proceeds with a litany of communities who were persecuted and rejected elsewhere, but found a home in the United States. Mennonites, Mormons, Muslims, Baptists, Jews, Huguenots, Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, Amish, Quakers, Seventh-day Adventists, Scientologists, and atheists. In the 1990s, the United States Congress demonstrated and advanced this consensus by passing two bills with overwhelming bipartisan majorities: the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, which protected the conscience rights of religious people, and the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, which mandated the promotion of religious freedom in American foreign policy. Religious freedom is also ensconced in international law. It is articulated in Article 18 of both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's also Article 18 in the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights. And even more thoroughly, it's articulated in the long-winded title but very important document called the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief of 1981. Europe, too, has taken up the cause. Several European countries and the European Union have followed the United States in incorporating religious freedom into their foreign policies in the past decade and a half. Yet, despite this momentum, recent years have also seen the consensus on religious freedom within the West weakening. A bevy of voices, including prominent intellectuals, has been calling the principle into question. So much so that Justice Jackson's fixed star now risks becoming a battleground in a culture war. Yes, the principle is in the Constitution, some ask, but why? On what basis does religious freedom deserve a right of its own, warranting special recognition among other human rights? Others ask whether religion is even a coherent enough phenomenon to be applied in law. They do not believe it is a genus of which there are species, or a stable, definable concept. Still others, such as the writers known as the New Atheist, consider religion to be pernicious, an irrational atavism that inevitably begets instability and violence. Another set of critics casts these doubts internationally and asserts that religious freedom is a product of Western modernity and should not be prescribed for non-Westerners who think differently about religion and its place in society, particularly Muslims living in Muslim-majority states who are most often the object of Western scorn. Contestation begets innovation, and so the times call for a new defense of religious freedom. What is critically needed, I believe, is a fresh argument for religious freedom as a universal human right, not only in the positive legal sense that it is stipulated by conventions, constitutions, and courts, but also in the moral, pre-political sense, that is, as a natural right. Indeed, today's critics contend that it is precisely the lack of a universal grounding for religious freedom that casts doubt about the principles placed in law, whether it be international conventions or the constitutions of countries. Many of the major defenses of religious freedom available today argue from the premises of a faith tradition, which can help to establish the principle among members, but will do little to forge consensus internationally or in pluralistic domestic settings. Much reasoning about religious freedom also takes place within constitutional traditions. A large literature accompanies the U.S. Constitution, but such reasoning assumes the framework of the Constitution in question. Here, by contrast, I seek to sketch the outlines of a defense of religious freedom as a universal principle, accessed through reason, grounded in human nature and human dignity. An assertion of a human right of religious freedom will not resolve or come close to resolving conflicts between religious freedom and other goods and principles. Such conflicts are real, often difficult to resolve, and are the stuff of case law in the tradition of the U.S. Constitution, the laws of many other countries, the European Union, and international law. If I do not directly engage in these other analyses, though, my argument has implications for them. If religion is believed to be a basic human phenomenon and a subject of human rights, it will have far more weight in both kinds of inquiry. Assessments of religion's relative role in a conflict will be less likely to conclude that religion is illusory, epiphenomenal, or peripheral, even while its role in any particular conflict remains an open empirical question. Legal reasoning will favor religion far more in balancing it against other goods and principles if this reasoning does not presuppose that religion is indistinguishable from generalized conscience and speech rights, or that the meaning of religious freedom is impossible to know. So my question remains narrower. Are there grounds for religious freedom as a universal human right? I contend that religious freedom is indeed a distinct human right, just as it is articulated in international law, often in juxtaposition with thought, conscience, and belief, and in the constitutions of about 90% of the world's sovereign states. I argue further that the basis of the human right of religious freedom is human dignity, and thus follow the lead of the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which begins with a recognition of the inherent dignity of all members of the human family. Dignity alone, though, does not ground the specific rights found in the international conventions, except perhaps the right to life. On what basis do all human beings have rights to work, education, free speech and expression, ownership of property, assembly, healthcare, and the like? I shall argue further that human beings possess worth not only simpliciter in itself, but also with respect to certain basic goods through which they flourish. To violate a basic good is to violate a dimension of a person's dignity. Thus, human beings have rights to these goods. For instance, to deny a person her right to speech or education would deny her the ability to grow in knowledge, a fundamental way in which her worth is realized. Can religious freedom also be tied to human dignity and thus human rights in this way? If so, then we would say that the human right of religious freedom protects a human good, one that instantiates human flourishing. But what is that good? Religion, I propose. Well, if that is my answer, then another problem arises. Many scholars are convinced that there is no coherent universal entity called religion that is practiced by human beings as such. There are different versions of this skepticism. Some point out that definitions of religion end up excluding cases of what most people regard as a religion. For instance, if religion is defined in terms of worshiping God, then certain versions of Hinduism, Buddhism, and shamanism, for instance, would be excluded. Others discover the opposite problem. Definitions of religion end up being too wide, applicable to so many phenomena that the concept loses coherence and tractability. If religion is defined in terms of the sacred, the luminous, or spiritual, then it would have to include ardent nationalism, fervent environmentalism, fanatical devotion to Marxist revolution, and attending a Guns N' Roses concert. Some scholars hold that religion as a general concept arose in Western modernity, especially through the influence of the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, colonialism, and Christian missions. On this reasoning, religion, far from being a universal, is a product of a certain time, a particular context, and most of all, the interest of the powerful. Still others are skeptical that there is a robust concept of religion just because they believe that religion is senseless. Earlier, I mentioned the new atheist, who follow in a tradition of Enlightenment thought of viewing religion as the product of pre-modern superstition that will eventually melt under the light and heat of science, democracy, free thought, economic and technological progress, education, and historical criticism. For thinkers like Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Sigmund Freud, religion is an alien force that distorts and confines true human interest, an oppressive superstructure, a slave mentality, an illusion. Yet, there are scholars who persist in viewing religion as universal. One of these is the late Martin Riesebrot, a religious studies scholar who was at the University of Chicago, who, in his 2010 book, The Promise of Salvation, developed a helpful way of defining and understanding religion that arguably avoids the pitfalls of other conceptions and identifies the core of what religions are all about. Riesebrot's approach is ingeniously simple. Innovatively, he focuses on what ordinary people do when they practice religion and on why they do it and what they expect to get out of it. Whereas in recent decades, scholars have approached religion as a system of beliefs, an expression of ultimate meaning, or the realm of the sacred, and have run into problems of excessive inclusion or exclusion, Riesebrot's stress on practices holds promise for zeroing in not only on what is distinct about religion, but also on how its practitioners themselves understand it. Sociologist Christian Smith, my colleague here at Notre Dame and a prolific scholar of religion, was captivated by Riesebrot's approach and sought to develop it and refine it further in combination with some of his own commitments. Smith and Riesebrot place central emphasis on practices, in which they include prayer, burning incense, reading sacred text, consulting oracles, repeating incantations, and scores of other behaviors that are enacted, repeated, endowed with meaning, and prescribed by a community that exists over time. The distinguishing feature of these practices, what Smith calls the pivotal idea in the definition, is their orientation towards superhuman powers. Religions center around entities that its members believe are neither fashioned by humans, either individually or collectively, nor dependent on humans, yet can, quote, make things happen or prevent them from happening, unquote, in which humans have a strong interest. Smith is careful to say, following Riesebrot, that superhuman is not necessarily supernatural. Religion may, but does not necessarily, involve God, gods, spirits, higher beings, holy, numinous, ultimate concern, and sacred, but rather may locate its powers in nature or other energies and dynamisms. Smith offers the example of dharmic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism, as ones that feature impersonal powers. For instance, Hinduism's Brahman, which is the creator of all that exists, but lacks personhood. All religions, though, also contain premises about superhuman powers, beliefs that range from implicit, presupposed meanings to elaborate and explicit statements of doctrine, as my own church, the Catholic Church, has. Smith's inclusion of beliefs is important. In contrast to other scholars of religion, Smith does not make beliefs the central focus of religion, yet in contrast to still others, he does not contend that beliefs are unique to certain religions like Protestant Christianity. Beliefs, he argues, are inescapably a part of religion, but also inevitably intertwined with practices. Through practices in which humans align themselves with superhuman powers, they gain benefits, blessings, goods, rewards, and avoid evils, ills, curses, punishments. The benefits and avoidance of evil may be everyday matters like success on an academic exam, a sunny day, or help in living virtuously, or larger life-defining matters like healing from a terminal illness, avoiding financial ruin, or the flourishing of one's children, or important spiritual matters like redemption from one's past sins, enlightenment, nirvana, happiness, entering heaven, or union with God. There is nothing esoteric about these benefits. The benefits that religion delivers and the evils that it avoids are the kind that concern everyone. The definition of religion is the sort that a sociologist or anthropologist would propound in an effort to describe human beings and their social world soundly. It does not describe in depth the beliefs and practices of any one religion, nor is it the work of a theologian. It says nothing about whether religion is good or valuable for human beings, or whether the beliefs of all, some, or one religion are true or truer than the rest. It says nothing about whether superhuman powers of any sort, God, gods, spirits, energy centers, really exist. If Smith is correct, though, that his and Riesebrandt's definition is fully adequate, properly inclusive, properly exclusive, then it succeeds in identifying a distinct human activity in a general, universal way, the first step in arguing for a human right of religious freedom. Let me offer a few glosses on this definition that clarify and deepen it. First, other features of religion, add content to what religion is and typically does. One is that religion provides answers to what may be called the grand questions of life. Where do we come from? Where did the universe come from? What is the basis of our moral convictions? Why do we suffer? Is there help for us in our suffering? What happens to us after death? Smith does not include the provision of answers to these questions in his definition of religion because he says that people also practice religion to gain help in everyday matters. However, in my view, if such answers are not all that religion provides, they are still central to what people across an extraordinary diversity of times and places have sought in religion, and what they have hoped that superhuman powers will provide. Other characteristics of religion deserves mention. Riesebrand places a central emphasis on worship, or the liturgies through which people seek direct access to superhuman powers. Worship does not add to Smith's definition. It is a practice of the kind he describes. It is an especially important practice, though, on account of its direct and intentional focus on superhuman powers. Most religions also contain a caste of clerics, a corps of people whose vocation is to help others establish relationship with superhuman powers. Religions embody a community, a cohesive group of people who practice the rituals together and orient their lives around them. Important also is a moral code that is associated closely with the superhuman power. Not every religion that fits Smith's definition contains all of these characteristics, but most contain most of them. A second gloss, one which buttresses Smith's argument, is that people and peoples across an astonishingly diverse array of cultures, geographic locales, and historical epochs have practiced religion that fits this definition. Smith argues that the practice of religion can be found in every society. Vividly illustrating religion's extraordinary historical reach is the recent discovery of the Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site in Turkey dating back to 9600 BCE, which some experts argue is a place for worship that predates agriculture. The site suggests that religion is at the origin of human experience. A third related gloss, also buttressing Smith's case, is that the concept of religion also has a long history among philosophers and theologians. Riesebrod and Smith's view that religion is human and universal may be novel in the university today, but it is hardly new or exclusively modern. In the Western tradition, the Roman philosopher Cicero, early Christian thinkers like Augustine, Lactantius, and Tertullian, and the medieval Christian philosopher Thomas Aquinas wrote of religion as a general human phenomenon, long before the modern world ever came to be. A fourth gloss is that most religions, both ancient and modern, have understood themselves to be one among several other religions, a general category, different forms of which other humans practice. This is clear in the cases of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the latter two of which explicitly differentiated themselves from their predecessors. Riesebrod maintains that Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Taoism, and Shintoism also contain writings whose authors conceived of their religion as one in a world also inhabited by other religions, though they did not use the word. Of course, the ways in which religions have regarded and related to other religions have varied enormously, including conquest, assimilation, friendship, dialogue, syncretism, and proselytism. The idea that religion is a genus of which there are species, though, is as old as religions themselves. A fifth and final gloss. Religion does not seem to be disappearing or proving to be an atavism, as predicted by proponents of the secularization thesis, who dominated the academy in the West only a generation ago. During the 20th century, when the secularization prediction reached its acme, the share of the world population adhering to Catholic and Protestant Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism jumped from 50% in 1900 to 64% in 2000, and actually an increase during the very time in which the Academy actually thought religion was disappearing. The World Values Survey finds that in the early 2000s, 79% of people surveyed in 50 countries across the globe reported belief in God, whereas 73% reported the same in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Again, the number is increasing. Global poll numbers are admittedly rough and do not capture unusually unreligious regions like Northwestern Europe, or the recent rise of the nones or the religiously unaffiliated in the United States. A global and historical perspective, though, suggests far more strongly that religion is universal than that it is a primitive phenomenon in secular decline. To say that religion is a universal human experience, though, does not establish it as one that merits protection through a universal human right. A further step is needed, an argument that religion is a human good that manifests human dignity. Aristotle taught that there are some goods that humans seek as instrumental to other goods, and other goods that they seek for their own sake. Money is almost always an instrumental good. Apart from coin collectors, people seek it as a means to what it can purchase. Goods sought for their own sake, by contrast, include knowledge, life, health, play, work, aesthetic appreciation, friendship, and others. Some of these goods, like work or knowledge, can also be instrumental to other goods, but what is important is that they can be final ends. I follow the lead of philosophers who call them basic human goods. Humans apprehend the basic goods through reflection on their practical experience. One looks at one's actions and asks, what am I doing? Why? To what end? The answers point to basic goods. The goods are not derived from logical demonstrations or from prior premises, but rather are grasped through an act of the intellect. I argue that religion, as defined by Smith, is a basic good. Seeking right relationship with superhuman powers, which is the key end of religious practices, is a basic end, a final end, one that humans seek for their own sake. A variety of experiences can serve as prompts that lead people to religion. An encounter with the beauty of religion as practiced by a person or a community, a grasp of the truth of a particular religion, an attraction to religion as an answer to suffering, a relatively unreflective continuation of one's upbringing, or a desire to support one's religious spouse. Once people do take up religion, though, orienting themselves towards superhuman practice, they will usually find intrinsic fulfillment in religion, at least to some degree. Now, it may seem that one aspect of Smith's definition risks rendering religion an instrumental good. Namely, he says that practices that elicit right relationship with superhuman powers are performed in hope of realizing human goods and avoiding things bad. Is this not precisely instrumental? I think Smith is correct in incorporating the hope of receiving goods and of avoiding ills into his definition of religion. They are essential to why people engage in religious practices. Undoubtedly, there are people who engage in religious practices in order to gain benefits in the most crassly instrumental or transactional sense. Think of the huckster TV preacher, for instance. Perhaps they think they can manipulate the superhuman powers or simply the other members of the community in order to elicit material prosperity. Even the more typically sincere religious person, though, anticipates manifold benefits from her practice of religion. As noted above, these range widely and might include the healing of a relative, success on an examination, friendship and community, peace with God, enlightenment, nirvana, and union with God. Is religion therefore only an instrumental good? Such a conclusion, I contend, is a distortion of what religion is and does. To say that A is instrumental to B is to say that A and B are separate entities, and that A is a means of achieving B. Do the practices through which a religious person seeks harmony with a superhuman power and the benefits that the person hopes to result from, or ills to be avoided through, this harmony match this description? In fact, authentic religion does not easily fit this picture of instrumentality. The benefits and the avoidance of ills are better seen as part and parcel of the practice of religion rather than effects that are produced by a cause. Above, I substituted the term right relationship as a shorthand for Smith's three terms of communication, access, and alignment. Relationship connotes something important about these terms, which is the two-way traffic that they describe between humans and the superhuman, in which humans petition, entreat, honor, worship, and seek to please, and the superhuman supplies, bestows, and blesses. In this sense, religion is a common good, shared not only between the members of the religious community, but also between these members and the superhuman power. The benefits and the evils, asking for them, receiving them, being saved from them, I submit, are part and parcel of the relationship, which people conceive as an end in itself. Helpful here is an analogy with another basic human good that is enacted in common, friendship, which is instantiated through a relationship between people mutually willing one another's good. This willing often involves the bestowing of benefits. One friend lends the other money, looks after his children when he is gone, offers advice, buys him a beer, and so on. Yet, at least if the friendship is a strong one, we would be missing the mark if we say that the friends view their relationship merely as a means to these goods. It is more accurate to say that they will these goods as an expression of their friendship. The same is true with the relationship between humans and the superhuman power that is religion. The practices through which humans seek to be right with a superhuman power and the reciprocal actions of that power together constitute a good that they value for its own sake. It is just because religion has this relational character that we may describe the crass instrumentalist, again, think of the huckster TV preacher, as one who misunderstands and malpractices religion. As a human good, a basic aspect of human fulfillment, religion is a dimension of human dignity. Dignity can mean either intrinsic worth or excellence due to one's station. In the present argument, intrinsic worth is most immediately relevant. Human beings should not be violated because they have intrinsic worth. Their religion is a dimension of this intrinsic worth. To violate it is to violate their dignity. In a certain sense, though, excellence is important too. Not the excellence of this or that class of human beings, but of all human beings by virtue of what sort of creature they are. Human beings are excellent because of their free will, their intelligence, their capacity for interpersonal love, and I would argue their results in capacity for realizing basic human goods, which are intrinsically valuable. Excellence is in fact closely tied with worth. Human beings have dignity because of their excellence. A final point on the basic human good of religion. It is not diminished by the fact that some persons elect not to practice it, whether they are atheist, agnostic, or passively indifferent. My argument makes no judgment of the validity of reasons for non-practice. These persons may be unconvinced that superhuman powers really exist. They may find religion unjust or wrongly restrictive, or perhaps they have experienced religion in a negative way. Neither the definition of religion nor the argument for religion as a basic good, though, makes a claim about the reality of any or all superhuman powers. Were it known for certain that they do not exist, then one might conclude that the good of religion is illusory and void of value. I know of no convincing argument, however, that they certainly do not exist. No proof of atheism. The dignity of the person with respect to the practice of religion is the core of the human right to religious freedom. From the fact that religion is a basic good, a fundamental, intrinsic, non-instrumental dimension of human flourishing, arises the moral norm that no person, faction, militant group, community, or government may interfere with a person's practice of religion, including his religious practice in coordination with others in a religious community. There is one other critical reason why religion must be free that is implicit in both Smith's definition of religion and in the account of religion as a basic good. That is, virtually all religions place a critical stress on interior commitment, the will, the heart, the enlightened mind, sincerity, authenticity, and right motive. This interior commitment is not a part of the definition of religion that I am employing here. Rather, it is a quality that properly accompanies the practices and beliefs that are a part of the definition, and one that most religions emphatically stress. They stress it in a variety of ways. Many religious faiths place strong value on a basic profession of faith, both on the part of children who are brought up in the religious community and on the part of people who enter the community from the outside. The value of such a profession is tied to its sincerity. Those going through the motions, doing only what they are told, or committing themselves mindlessly, are considered less virtuous. Further still, all religions place central stress on interior cultivation, whether it be the engagement of the heart and the soul, growth in virtue, practicing true worship, exercising sincere belief and faith, achieving enlightenment, surrendering to God, or practicing loving kindness. Of course, religions also invoke criteria for outward conformity, whether this pertains to moral norms, the practices of virtues, dietary matters, ritual, and numerous other activities. External behavior, though, is to be performed with sincerity and right motive. Finally, Simply insofar as religion is a basic good in the way that I described above, it engages the will and the understanding. It is chosen, like all basic goods that are chosen, through a deliberate and knowledgeable act. Outward behavior and inward commitment, then, are inextricably linked. If this interior commitment is to be genuine, it cannot be coerced. Were it coerced, or were it adopted out of fear of harm at the hands of others, for social approval or to avoid shame, the commitment would not be a commitment at all. So too, the search for and the ability to reject such commitments out of conscience is entailed in the very same freedom. More formally, religious freedom is the civic right of all persons in religious communities to express, practice, and spread their religion in all of its public and private dimensions, and to be free from heavy discrimination on account of their religion. In essence, religious freedom means that no person, alone or in community, should have to pay a material penalty for the practice of her religion. Religious freedom is not an absolute right. That is to say, this right does not give religious people license to do anything they like in the practice of their religion. All of the major human rights conventions, as well as important statements of the right, such as the Catholic Church's landmark declaration of 1965, Dignitatis Humanae, make this point. Religious people may not curtail the religious freedom of others in the name of their own religion. Religious people may not violate other human rights either. To take some obvious, though sadly genuine examples, religions may not practice child sacrifice or lead their members in committing suicide, as at Jonestown. Of course, there are controversies. Polygyny and female genital mutilation are examples of religiously authorized practices that many believe to violate other human rights, but are globally disputed. Then there are the numerous controversies that make up the subject matter of constitutional law in developed democracies, where judges decide how religion is to be balanced against other goods. Again, resolving these many controversies is not my task here. Rather, it is to outline an argument for why religion deserves to be enumerated as a distinct right, the boundaries of whose practice then need to be delineated. The grounding for the right of religious freedom that I have offered, however, does imply that religion ought to be afforded wide deference and a presumption against restriction. The concept of basic goods indeed helps us decide where the boundaries of this deference and presumption lie. Again, one ought not to violate or destroy one basic good in the pursuit of another. If religion damages life, bodily integrity, the pursuit of knowledge through education, or other basic goods, then it may justly be restricted or regulated. Short of this, its practice ought to be respected. What I have been arguing for is a moral right of religious freedom, a natural right, a human right. Such a right is pre-political, meaning that it does not require enactment in positive law for its validity. But the value of this right urges just such an enactment. So it may be considered a great historical achievement that this right has been incorporated into the major human rights conventions, the constitutions of developed democracies and many other countries, and the European Union. The purpose of the human right of religious freedom is to protect the wide diversity of ways in which humans relate to powers that are beyond human and live out answers to ultimate questions. Here, I have sought to articulate a manner in which this human right might be grounded and defended. To the degree that religion enjoys such a grounding and defense, it merits a right of its own, and ought not simply to be folded into rights like speech, belief, conscience, or expressed or assimilated into broad principles like equality and democracy, like so many scholars are proposing today. While this argument alone cannot show how religion is to be balanced against other goods and principles, it purports to answer contemporary critics who claim either that religion does not merit a right of its own in law and policy, or more strongly, that religion is pernicious and ought not to be protected at all. Religion, I maintain, is a dimension of human dignity whose free pursuit, according to conscience, ought to be protected. So that brings me to the end of my remarks, and I would love to engage in comments and questions.
The discussion you had on Smith's definition of religion, we don't typically hear someone define religions in any sort of concise way. It's more of a connotative term. We know it when we see it in a sort of way. So before I open it up to questions from the other attendees, I would like to start with my own question, actually. That being, what does religious liberty look like in policy, in practical sense? Because it's very much disputed, right? In the sense that perhaps religious liberty could be achieved if we don't engage in the religious questions at all, if we just simply evacuate religion from the public square. I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah. Well, now, of course, again, there are many, constitutional lawyers there are thousands of pages written on, religion and how it is balanced against other things, what its scope is, the question of whether there are exemptions to generally applicable laws for religious conscience and so forth and so on. I think at a minimum, religious freedom, I want to argue, is a coherent, definable right and ought to be incorporated into law. And what it means at the core is that nobody, whether that's another person, another organization, or a government, there's kind of a presumption against interference in the basic practice of that religion. In other words, if it's going to be interfered with or coerced by somebody, in other words, blocked by anybody, or even placed a penalty on it. Like you think of the HHS mandate under the Obama administration, where they said, we're not going to go out and block you from coerce you into, but you're going to pay a heavy fine if you don't incorporate contraception and abortifacients into your, organization's healthcare. So Notre Dame or whoever, you're going to pay a huge fine. So there's a penalty. That's a form of coercion, as I see it. In other words, religious freedom means that you should be able to live and practice your religious faith without any kind of penalty or price imposed by another, or discrimination. So if I belong to a certain religion, I shouldn't have any less access to public offices. We have a no religion test in our Constitution, no religious test. So in other words, in a lot of countries, if you don't belong to in religion, then you're not likely to hold government office, or you're not likely to have the best jobs or the best positions, or you're going to be excluded because you're not a Muslim or Hindu or what have you, right? So that shouldn't matter. So again, that's a form of penalty. That person is discriminated against, penalized, faces a disadvantage because of his or her religion. And that shouldn't be true either. So there should be a very wide scope, a strong presumption against any kind of coercion. The only coercion would be if religions people are doing something that violates the basic human rights of others. So if I'm practicing my religion in a way that makes it so somebody else can't practice their religion, or if I'm practicing some kind of cruelty or something like that, then that's where we draw the line. Or, imposing some damage to the public good or the common good of an egregious sort. That's the debate. Now, of course, there are controversial cases. In the United States in the 19th century, the Supreme Court said to Mormons, you can't have polygamy. Now, were they practicing one of those cruel practices, or was that something that should be within their scope of their religious practice? I would tend to argue the Supreme Court was right. I think that I come down on the side of saying that polygamy is a kind of a cruel and abusive practice. Now, they might disagree. Maybe they would say the man can have 3 or 4 wives and treat them all with equal dignity, and everybody gets along just fine. I'm skeptical, but that's the kind of case we have to adjudicate. Which side of the line does it fall upon? So
great. No, that was a great answer. Thank you so much for that. So I have a question here. And Max asks, is there an argument to be made that secularism is itself a religion? I know you, in Smith's definition, he sort of has the element of the supernatural involved in it. So it kind of comes at odds with thinking of secularism or thinking about these other secular forms, as sometimes we like to call them religious in a sense, right? So yeah, I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah. So the question is at the core about the supernatural?
Right. It's about the claim that secularism itself is a religion.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right. Well, there is insight there, in that, secularism often wants to say that it represents a kind of neutral baseline of human experience, that neutral, non-judgmental, something everybody can agree upon. And then religion is said to be the sort of the irrational departure from that. So again, that was the thinking of the secularization paradigm, which dominated the academy, probably still does in the West, although it's been challenged too. That says that secularization, the idea that came out of the Western Enlightenment, says that it's normal for people to be secular, right? That's normal. That's rational. That's normal. And that's the basis on which we can all get along. When people are religious, they're superstitious. They're doing something that is kind of just based on feeling and desire and irrationality. And if they start making big claims, then because it's irrational, it's going to start leading to conflict and violence and things like that. So that's the secular. Now, one of the forms of pushback against that on the part of religious people is to say to the secular, well, you in fact, your secularism is not as universal and rational and normal and neutral as you say it is. In fact, your secularism is really just another form of religion. Your secularism is something that is unusual in world history. It's confined to a particular time and place. It's, people hold it with a kind of fundamentalist fervor. And so your secularism is just another religion too. And so I think that there's a valid response in that, in wanting to kind of dethrone the secularism, right? However, I would not quite go as far as saying that secularism is a religion. I would say that secularism is maybe a form of political theology. It's a doctrine with claims about religious truth. We ought to take it as such. But, I don't want to, I worry about, defining religion too broadly such that it's anything and everything. Because if it becomes everything, then it doesn't become anything. And then we lose the basis for saying that it's a phenomenon that deserves protection. Then we fall right into the hands of the people who say that there's no real coherent entity here that forms the basis of any human right. So I think that one of the things that makes religion, and that characterizes the core thing that characterizes how people have practiced it, is a kind of right relationship that one seeks with the more than human, a more than human entity that is very, very important, very great, that is ultimate, that has answers to the ultimate questions, and is of the most important things. And so it's a relationship with a beyond human entity that has that kind of ultimate ground kind of quality and status. And I think that's not just a belief. And it's through practices that we access that, through actions that we live that, harmony, seek that harmony or right relationship with the more than human. So it's not just a matter of abstract beliefs, or it's not just an ism, right? It's not just a doctrine. And that's one of the things that I think how religion is being portrayed in the modern world. It's just another set of beliefs. Well, it's just another set of beliefs, then why should it, and this is what the skeptics are saying, why should it have special protection? Why not Why not other beliefs? Why not the ethical society? Why not environmentalism, Marxism, whatever? Why doesn't that deserve equal status? So then we start saying, well, and it's hard to answer. If it's just a set of beliefs, then why have a place in it for our First Amendment? Why not just make it a matter of conscience and speech and all that? So I guess I think there's a phenomenon there that's a lot more than just beliefs. It's a right relationship with an entity that is more than human.
Great. And that basically got right into the heart of the question. I think that was really direct. Great. The next question I have here is, from your understanding of Catholic intellectual and political tradition, and your engagement with that, what do you find to be the most challenging argument against religious freedom?
The most challenge from a Catholic perspective?
Right.
Well, I think there are the two big arguments now that are kind of have kind of arisen in recent years that are seeking to bring religion down, so to speak. One is what I would call the Enlightenment argument, which says that religion is not really distinctive. It's just one of many choices that people can make, beliefs that people can have, and so forth. And so that's one. But I think I've kind of answered that. I think it's not just a belief. It's not just a choice. It's a relationship with a more than human entity. But then the other is what I might call the postmodern critique, which says that religion is just a concept that was invented by the modern West and is sort of imposed on the rest of the world. It's sort of a Western colonialist, Western imperialist kind of thing. And, religion, the idea that there's religion, that there's a kind of category of which there are many kinds. The criticism is that that's something that just arose in the modern world. And it's really Christians and Western colonialists that took that and started imposing it upon people who never thought of themselves as a religion. So take something like Hinduism. Well, people over there who are Hindus, they don't think of themselves as members of a religion called Hinduism. They never did. It was just a bunch of people who had a set of practices and beliefs in a particular part of the world. It's called Hindu because it came out of the Indus River region. And to call it Hinduism is to make it into something kind of in our own image. Western Christians do that because we think of our faith as a religion, and then we impose it on them. We make everybody else out to be a religion, but we're making them out to be something that is like us, where that's not how they think of themselves, right? And so it ends up becoming kind of a tool of domination. So colonialists make Hinduism out to be a religion, and then they say, well, it's inferior. It's an inferior form. It's not as true as Christianity, and therefore we can dominate them and impose ours on theirs. But yeah, I mean, I think there is some truth to that. I think religion has been used in that way. But again, I don't accept the critique in the end. I think it's, I think religion is a more distinctive human phenomenon, that it's not just a product of modernity. You can find it in the thought of Thomas Aquinas. He thought that religion was a natural human virtue, very similar to how I think of it, by which people worship God. He thought God could be known by reason. So even before we have the revealed truths of Christianity that he thought were critically important, he thought that religion was a natural human good. In doing so, he derived that idea. He cites Cicero, who was a pagan philosopher. I mean, Plato, we find the idea of the gods. So way before modernity, we get something like religion. Then, Riesebrot argues that Eastern religions also think of themselves as something like religious traditions, where they are one in a world where there are others. And so lots more can be said, but I don't quite buy that postmodern critique either. Now, on the Catholicism dimension, for me, the great statement of religious freedom is not just for me, it is the great statement of religious freedom, is dignitatis humanae. So 1965, the Vatican Council declares religious freedom as a universal human right. So, I mean, I'm deeply inspired by dignitatis humanae. In fact, a lot of my way of thinking about it is really thanks to dignitatis humanae, is really due to the framework of how it laid it out. But so it said that, dignitatis humanae made very clear that the Catholic Church was not backing off its claim about truth as revealed by God through Jesus Christ. And ultimately, I thought that the purpose of religious freedom was to give people the space, to search for the truth, to search for that truth, which is the truth that inheres in the Catholic Church. But there had to be religious freedom for every human being based upon their human dignity. And their search for and embrace of that truth had to be free, because it was something that we embrace through judgment, through choice, through free will. And to short circuit that is to fail to respect that human dignity. You can kind of see the lines of my own argument. A critic might say that I'm just kind of, importing dignitatis humanae. But if you look at also, there was another document of the Second Vatican Council called Nostra Aetate, which was a document on other religions. And it sort of placed the Catholic Church's relationship with other religions on a new footing, much more one of dialogue and encounter and friendship. But in so doing, they recognize that there is value to other religions, that they have value and have truth. And so I think that kind of goes with the idea of religion being a basic good, that it's something that there are other religions, other ways in which people instantiate that relationship through the more than human. Now, the Catholic Church would say, still is adhering to its claim that the Catholic Church has the fullness of truth, but it recognizes the dignity of the search for truth, recognizes there are other religions which have partial truth that demand respect. And so in a way, my own thinking is kind of trying to flesh out the, what stands at the intersection of those documents.
Great. I think also another element to the question that was asked that you're answering was, I think it's kind of pointing to a tendency that we're seeing with sort of this radical traditionalism within the Catholic Church, in the form of integralism, right? That people like to point to Aquinas' stance on heretics. They like to point to these days and say, well, the state has a role in promoting the right religion, and therefore the space for religious liberty is very, very limited, if there's any. So, yeah, I'm wondering if what you would have to say about that through a Catholic perspective is, you just spoke about dignitatis humanae, and some of them may even say that this whole Second Vatican Council is illegitimate, right?
Yeah. So there is this big kind of movement afoot called integralism, and it seems to be kind of rooted in a sort of worry that the Catholic Church is getting marginalized, and I think there are real threats along those lines. I tend to agree with the integralists in terms of what they see as the problem, a kind of secular liberalism that is sort of, shoving. I think as the question earlier said, shoving religion out of the public square. But you have to ask more deeply, well, what does it mean? One thing integralism could mean would just be that religion should have much more of a role in public life and shouldn't be marginalized, in which case I agree. But I think that sometimes they mean more. Sometimes what they mean is that there ought to be an established church. Now, interestingly, you might ask, is an established church compatible with dignitatis humanae? You might think at first, well, no, it wouldn't be. Religious freedom means no established church. But however, it doesn't necessarily mean that. And dignitatis humanae does allow that you can have an established church. So in the United States, we have the First Amendment forbids a national established church. Congress shall make no law, But many European countries, Western countries, there are established churches. England has one. Until recently, most Scandinavian countries had one. Germany sort of establishes two, or at least posits two. And then raises tax money for those two churches. So Dignitatis Humanae says you can have a kind of direct government support for religion, and it can be an established church. But it says you also have to have religious freedom. So if you don't belong to the established church, then you should be able to still have religious freedom. And again, England is a great example. They've got an established church, but maybe a part of the issue is no one believes in it anymore. But also, regardless of whether anyone believes in the Anglican Church, there are you can belong to another religion and be free: Methodist, a Muslim, Baptist, whatever. And so there is religious freedom there. And so established church, okay, if that's what the integralists want. Now in the United States, we have a problem with our Constitution. Not going to allow that. But the integralists tend to think, well, unless you have the established church again, the Catholic Church is going to be marginalized. However, some integralists go to a third level, which is to seem to want to peel back Dignitatis Humanae, or argue that Dignitatis Humanae doesn't, in fact, forbid coercion of non-Catholic religious faith. And there I would have to take issue with them pretty directly. I think that Dignitatis Humanae does, in fact, forbid coercion. And I wouldn't interpret it in a way that means something otherwise. And so that's where when some integralists argue that's where I would take issue for all the reasons that I outlined in my lecture. And I think that's the proper interpretation of Dignitatis Humanae.
Great. So we're getting close to the end of the hour. We have time for one more question, and we have one right here. It's a great question. And it has to do with the reconciliation of religious liberty with other rights. So I'm just going to read this question directly. If religious practice is leading to an ultimate good, how can we place another good, and for example, right to education, above it? The religious person is not going to see the value of that other good, and the outsider is not going to see the value of the religious practice. What is a concept of good that we can use to evaluate other final goods or intrinsic goods?
Yeah. So in my view, basic goods are natural, they're knowable, they're constitutive of human flourishing, they're goods which every human being ought to practice, ought to have the freedom to practice and realize and pursue. If somebody doesn't perceive religion to be a basic good, I would just argue, well, I think you're wrong about that. Religion is a basic human good for all persons. And let's talk about why you don't perceive it as such and, have a discussion about that. But there are other basic human goods. And I take other basic human goods to be a kind of beginning of a set of guidelines for, where those limits to religious freedom might be. So if religious people are then practicing their religion in a way that violates other human goods of other people, then that would be a problem. I'm just trying to think of examples. Maybe.
Yes.
Maybe
you mentioned the Sisters of the Poor case, right? And the argument within it is, well,
all right,
you allow the religious liberty or these nuns to follow their religious convictions, you are limiting the good of access to reproductive health, for example.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So good. So yeah, this is the issue is, and I think that if Biden is elected, as it looks like probably will happen, that's kind of in flux right now, we'll start to see those kinds of issues again, where religious freedom proposes to be curtailed on the basis of other things that are claimed to be a good, like same-sex marriage or reproductive health, a right to an abortion or what have you. And one of the things, that makes that challenging is that people are saying, well, that's a right to conscience, that, for people to be married to a member of the same sex is, I believe that's my religious beliefs, that's okay. Right. So my religious freedom should be able to allow me to do that. Well, this is So I'm skeptical of this, but this is where I would invoke. I think I would invoke natural law. That so again, I'm not going to make the argument on the grounds of the Constitution or law, but let's take it just on grounds of justice and reasoning according to natural law. Well, I would say that the same-sex marriage thing is not doesn't trump religion because it's not really marriage. I don't think it's really a good. So I would take the view that the claim that that's marriage is not really right, that it's not really marriage, and nor is our sexual acts or relationships based on sexual acts between members of the same sex. That does not have the status of a good. That's a false good, an apparent good, or it's not really a human good. Whereas marriage, defined as between man and woman, really is a human good. And abortion is not a human good, is not a true right, because it's one person violating the basic good of another, their life. And so there's no right to an abortion. In fact, there's a right to not be aborted, the right to life. And so I would argue that the reasoning on which that purports to restrict religion, it just doesn't pass muster according to natural law. Those are not real goods that are being asserted against religion. Now, this is a problem, as we saw under the Obama administration. I think we're going to see a return to these kinds of issues under Biden-Harris, if that's how things go with our election. But it's also on the international level. So the no less than the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, who is supposed to be like the main guy in the UN, Rapporteur on Religious Freedom. This is remarkable. The main guy in the world who is supposed to be the UN's guy on religious freedom. He himself wrote a paper last year saying that religious freedom, should be restricted, or does not mean interfering in any way with same-sex marriage or abortion rights. And in fact, it ought to be restricted and curtailed and has limits when it rubs up against those other rights. In other words, he thinks those things ought to trump religious freedom in international law. Well, for me, this is enormously problematic that the special rapporteur would argue this. And so I wrote a paper for the Heritage Foundation in which I argued this. And that's where I made the argument that these kinds of claims are not based on natural law, therefore should not restrict religious freedom. But that's where I think if we depart from natural law and start putting human rights based upon just whatever anyone claims or desires, then there's no end to it. And I think religious freedom is in big trouble. It becomes very precarious. I think a natural law foundation both shows why religious freedom is valuable, but also helps to show why other things can't trump it.
Great. And that was a very astute question as well. It actually spoke directly to what I was thinking as well. And what I mentioned in the introduction, which is that there seems to be a tendency to sort of pit religious liberty against other rights, right? That it seems to be in a sort of sense a zero-sum game, where if you allow religious liberty to quote unquote win in the Supreme Court, then it comes at the expense of other rights. And it's very pertinent as well. We see it. We just saw Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia. That was just argued a few days ago. I think it was on election day. They had oral arguments, and that's another case where
right. That's coming up.
Right, the right of self-determination by families, right, to adopt whomever, versus the rights of the Catholic Church to recognize what is considered marriage, what is considered a family. Right. So great. And
Amy Tony Barrett will understand religious freedom properly and defend them against the city of Philadelphia, defend these agencies.
Yeah. And
I might also point out go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
I would say under the Obama administration, the head of the Civil Rights Commission, no less, said that religious freedom was just nothing more than a kind of cloak for bigotry. So that's a pretty remarkable thing for the head of the Civil Rights Commission to say. So this is a sort of worry, not just that they think religious freedom can be trumped by other things, but they think it's just not. I mean, it's on our First Amendment of the Constitution, and he's saying it's a cloak for bigotry. Well, if that's the thinking, then we've got problems.
Right. I'm wondering if you can actually take one more quick question. And this is another great question. Actually, it has to do with Kennedy's opinion both in Planned Parenthood versus Casey and also in Obergefell, where he states very famously, right, that human beings have the right to define their own reality. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So why should we take the natural law stance rather than Justice Kennedy's stance?
Yeah, well, that's a great expression of the view that contrasts with my view, which is a natural law view. And so Kennedy's view, that statement by Kennedy is probably the kind of signature expression of what might be called self-expressive individualism, which says that no natural goods or natural law is incorporated into public morality. Rather, we just try to build a political sphere in which everybody has rights. They don't interfere with anybody else's rights, but within their sphere, then we give them that sphere to kind of define their own existence, to sort of posit their own morality, define their own morality, pursue it as they wish based on their desires. And, nothing can interfere with that. And it's the thinking of people who hold that view the people who hold that view are the ones who are calling religious freedom into question. Because religion then is just another one of the whole, wide menu of choices that a person could choose. Define the mystery of one's own existence. Well, they might define that as religion. They might define that as playing golf on Sunday morning. They might define that as tree hugging. They might define that as, whatever they want, or none of that, or anything, nothing at all. And so they would say, well, privileging religion, there's just no basis for that. Privileging religion is just, picking out one of many possible choices and giving that status in the law. And there's no basis for that. But by contrast, in contrast to a self-expressive individualist view of public life and law, I would defend a natural law perspective, which would hold that rights have their foundation in human dignity, and human dignity is connected with basic human goods and is closely linked with moral norms that are based upon that dignity and those goods, fixed moral norms, and that and those moral norms are the natural law which anybody can apprehend by virtue of their reason, but has a fixity with respect to the goods and norms that it involves. And so we give people a wide freedom in modern societies, but we give them that freedom in order to pursue those goods and a life, a vocation defined in terms of those goods. That's very different from defining one's own existence, right? So freedom has a purpose, is ordered towards the good. And so in that firmament, then I would call religion is a basic good. Religion is a good that people should be protected for people to pursue and not be interfered with.
Great. So yes, unfortunately, we've reached the end of the hour. I would love to thank you, Professor Philpott, for taking the time to give us this great lecture in the fall. And thank you to the attendees for not only attending, but also the great questions that you presented, Professor. And of course, I'd like to thank the Intercollegiate Studies Institute for hosting this event. And again, you can contact me. I put my email in the chat if you're interested in getting involved, interested in other opportunities, especially with student conferences that the Intercollegiate Studies Institute organizes. So in the future, hopefully in person, soon, we can have these sort of conferences where we can engage in these different topics with professors like Professor Philpott. And you can engage them with people outside of Notre Dame and your fellow peers. So if you're interested in these sort of prospects, please contact me through my email. So great.
Two last comments. One is, if you are interested in reading the paper that my lecture is drawn from, I'm happy to share it. It's forthcoming as in an edited volume. And then secondly, I just want to thank you and give my full encouragement to the ISI group forming here on campus. I think that's fantastic. And to ISI, and to express my gratitude and encouragement for all that you do.